Welcome to Shomai, the only show exclusively dedicated to the business of mixed martial arts. I'm Paul Gift, the economist. With me, as always, we have Jason Cruz, our lawyer, and John Nash, the man who knows everyone and everything in MMA. And today we're going to be talking about the antitrust lawsuit that is moving into its final phase before possible trial called summary judgment. Jason will explain that to you in just a second, what that means. The UFC did their initial filing. Basically, they're trying to win the case before going to trial. And we're also going to talk about the DAZN deal with Bellator that happened a little while back, although we've not been able to do a new show with some of the things that were going on. And then maybe a little bit about McGregor coming back, business issues there. So let's start with you, Jason. Why don't you explain to everyone what summary judgment is and what might be happening in this next phase of the case?
Okay, so summary judgment basically is a motion made by a party in which they will seek to dismiss the case short of trial. This is different from the motion to dismiss, which you may recall a couple years ago that Zuffa attempted to do with the plaintiff's lawsuit. That's kind of initial way to try to kick out the lawsuit. Since then, we've had depositions, written discovery, this, that, and the other thing, a lot of factual and expert information coming in. And now Zuffa is yet again coming back and saying, you know, we've done all of this. And now after all of this has happened, there is nothing, no general issue of disputable fact that the plaintiffs have set forth, which they could bring forth their allegations of antitrust violations. So basically, the threshold is whether that the party making the motion must set forth the facts which show that there is nothing disputable, no disputable evidence that plaintiffs can bring up with respect to their antitrust claims. The motion itself brought by Zuffa is very poignant, very elemental, and that's what you kind of see in motions. They want to make it very basic, showing you what their assertions are, showing that there's based upon the evidence presented by plaintiffs, the deposition testimony, which we'll get into, and there's a lot of that. All of the stuff that's happened, there is no showing by the fighters that there were allegations of antitrust violations. There's nothing that they will argue that there's nothing anti-competitive about their business practices. And so from there, what you'll see in the next phase is plaintiffs opposing the motion for summary judgment. Of course they will, and basically responding to each point set forth in their motion, saying, you know, this is why this is wrong. This is why our antitrust claims should go forward. So you guys could kind of add in as far as what you feel, how the motion read to you. Was it a strong motion or not? I personally thought that it was a very strong motion, with the UFC making strong points about there being no antitrust violations. And I'll get into that in a little bit once we started to talk about depots and stuff.
Yeah, and I'll point out that it appears that the fighters have the word they use, the UFC uses, is abandoned their monopoly claim. They used to have this claim that the UFC's monopoly and monopoly in the output market and monopsony in the input market was mutually reinforcing. And now, you know, I was always confused as to why you needed that, except for eventually the consumer welfare standard. But it just seemed that they were going to have such a problem in the output market. But now it appears that that's gone, and the focus is on the input market and what's going on with rival MMA competitors and fighter services and stuff like that. But so, John, this was the UFC's opening salvo, and the fighters are going to come back, I believe, in September. the schedule said September, but then the filing here said August. So one of the two, we'll see. But John, what was
September
your
2018, right?
what's that?
This September this year, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
just making sure.
Yes. So what was the biggest thing that stood out to you?
I mean, there's a couple things. I was somewhat surprised. Well, first of all, I'll say I thought it was fairly strong. Is you always talk about the story, and I thought it did a good job of telling the story from the UFC side that what basically making the plaintiff story not hold up. So the storytelling wise, I thought was pretty good. It's hard to tell the math stuff. It's hard to tell, like, with the half the evidence we can't see, the algorithms, who knows about that junk. But story wise, I thought it was very good because it presented it when you read it, it actually did a great job, because for me, when a lot of times we get these filings, I can't tell the full story because shit's redacted, and this did a very concise breakdown of it from the UFC's point of view, and it did from the story they tell point of view. Is that the plaintiff's story it doesn't add up and all that. So it did a great job. We'll have to wait to see the plaintiffs come back and knock their story out of the water and put a different framing on the way they're telling their story, so it holds up. God, I can't believe I'm saying the word story again. I should get I need a thesaurus or something. This is terrible. But I was surprised about a couple of things. One is, were you kind of taken back there was only a brief mention of the Amex claim, considering it was just filed, and everybody made a big deal about that? Previously, they mentioned on, like, I think one page, they have a brief section about the Amex claim, that they claim it can only, that the claims that market power can only be established using indirect methods. And then, if I remember right, then there's an effort, they want to negate the plaintiff's proofs of market power by something like that. I can't remember, it's going off the top of my head. But were you guys, I mean, Jace, were you surprised?
It was surprising they didn't go.
Wait, I should explain for people that are aware. The Amex decision was a recent Supreme Court decision that said that, maybe you should explain it better than me, since you're a lawyer and I'm just some putz on a podcast here.
Go ahead.
It's a two-market. It was a decision that between there's two-sided market. You explain it. Shit, I'm already screwing it up.
Wait, let me pull it up, and then I will.
That's cheat. You should know this.
No,
you're the legal expert on the show.
No, I don't. I seriously don't. But let me tell you while I bring that up, that one of the things that they do stress, although they didn't stress the Amex case, is the Golden Boy decision, where Al Heyman Golden Boy decision, in which Heyman obtained summary judgment against Golden Boy for a similar antitrust claim back in, was it March of 2017, 2016?
I want to say January or February, somewhere.
Yeah, but basically they do look at that. They do revisit that and cite to that several times, and so I noted that. So I do have the American Express case, and I remember it being a terrible decision, Ohio versus American Express. And basically what happened was, in a 5-4 decision in favor of American Express, the court determined that Amex's anti-steering policies did not violate antitrust law. So what was happening is that these credit card companies, some have lower interest transaction fees than others. And American Express was one of several credit card companies that had a policy of not telling merchants about the lower fees, even though merchants could steer their consumers to lower fees. So basically, the Supreme Court said that American Express's policy was not in violation of the antitrust law. So that's basically what it was. I don't know if that was kind of with the point that you were making, John.
No, I'll boil it down for the idiots out there. The basic point is they're basically saying they're a middleman. The Amex case was middlemen, the platforms. If they're representing a supplier, a vendor, whatever, on one side, and two markets basically. On someone like a seller on one side, and they're just delivering it to the consumer on the other side. As the middle person, they're basically, if I'm not mistaken, they're immune to the antitrust charge because they're just delivering the service. They're just a service provider for the other, they're the platform for the service provider. They're not the actual service. So in this case, UFC is basically claiming they're not the real supplier of the product. The fighters are, the fans are. They're just the middle person that supplies one to the other, and that's it.
Look, guys, and what they're trying to do here, I'll read the exact words for you.
No one got it right. Paul is going to come in and step in. And...
what the UFC is trying to do, these are their words, saying that from Amex, a plaintiff must define a relevant market to evaluate the anti-competitive effect of an alleged vertical restraint, even when using direct evidence. So what they're basically going to try to do is say that Singer's indirect evidence doesn't win the case. It's not strong enough. And for direct evidence, they'll rebut it, of course, but then also throw this in here that they don't really need to rebut it because he didn't define a relevant market, and that's what they're arguing in this case. Now he's going to say I did define a relevant market, right? But they're going to say you didn't define a relevant market, and this case says you need to do that when you're using direct evidence. So it's just an additional way of trying to get rid of some of the things that Singer does, especially attacking his direct evidence, because his direct evidence is that wages are going down, right? But he's not using actual wages, he's using wage share. And so one way of attacking that is to say you need to be using actual wages. Another way of attacking that is to say you didn't define a relevant market, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So based on that standard that would regarding general issue of disputable fact, there is none because Singer's not using indirect evidence, basically.
Yeah,
I mean, Singer's going to say he is using.
Oh yeah, I know, but that's the argument applied by the UFC.
Yeah.
Yeah, Singer's going to argue that what he's using wage share, and wage share is acceptable because it's kind of a standard in calculating sports. And they're going to say, no, the standard's often wage level, and we're showing wage level's been going up for the UFC. And then their argument's going to say you haven't defined the definitive market because the market's an ambiguous group of fighters. And he's going to say, no, I'm very specific on the foreclosure, that I'm talking specifically ranked fighters based on these, these rating systems, whatever. So, and then they use the evidence in the case is that the UFC only had 22% of all the ranked fighters. And he's going to then come back and say, no, but I showed that the higher you go in the rankings, the more valuable you are. So that'll be the back and forth in that part. When they reply, I'm sure that'll be the response. I do think, though, that's one of the weaker parts about the plaintiffs is that, and if you remember, we used to talk about this a long time ago, Paul, and before we even had Jason on the show, on the comments of Bloody Elbow. For years ago, if you go back to my old comments on Bloody Elbow, the strongest case, I think, against the UFC for having a monopoly is the International Boxing Club of New York case. And I'll go why that's a very strong case, and I'm sure I'll point out why it's a very weak case right afterwards. But it's a very strong case in the sense that International Boxing Club was very simple. They signed all the champions, the belt, the title, the Joe Louis title. Then they made all the top contenders sign if they wanted to fight for that belt, because that belt gave them a lot more value to be the champion. And then people on the outskirts that wanted to even have a chance to contend, they would have to sign with the International Boxing Club. So you created a network effect because you monopolized the title. And the UFC, if you look at their business models, obviously they've monopolized the value of their titles. First, it's the UFC title, which is the oldest, most prestigious. That's the way sanctioning body titles work. It's based on the prestige of the length of the time they've been around and who's been the champion. The champion gives the value to the belt. If you read boxing studies, they'll explain that. So the UFC title was worth something. Then they went out and acquired Pride. And there was that email that leaked in the case earlier that supposedly, possibly, they just wanted to foreclose on Pride to get rid of it. They got Pride's title wrapped up in theirs. They have that value together. Their fighters signed up. They went from 40% of the top 10 fighters in all the rankings to 70. Then they went to Strikeforce and potentially did the same thing. And there's an interesting comment by Joe Silva that appeared in one of the quotes somewhere that we own MMA right around the time they were negotiating the purchase of Strikeforce. So that's a little suspicious. I don't know how that works in. But right there, it shows that they're buying up the top fighters, getting them under contract, and getting the top guy locked into contract. And basically everybody has to come in. Now, that's to me a very strong case why they have monopsony power. They have monopoly over the prestige titles, monopoly on the top fighters, and you rise in the ranks in boxing and MMA by beating top guys. When you beat them, you don't not always take their spot directly, but that's how you become a top guy. Mayweather became a big pay-per-view draw by beating Oscar De La Hoya. Same with Pacquiao. Nate Diaz is a star now because he beat Conor at some point. Okay, so that to me is a very strong case. Where it's weak, though, is MMA, unlike boxing, doesn't have separate sanctioning titles and sanctioning bodies and promoters. And in boxing back then, you could make the collusion argument. You can't make the collusion argument in MMA. Boxing also, more recently, has the Ali Act that forbids it. So you couldn't legally do that in MMA. So that's what, to me, is the strongest case that says, oh, yeah, definitely the UFC has monopsony power, is also the point like, well, how is that a legal monopsony power or not? That's my gist. So that's the strong case. I don't know how the plaintiffs can make such an argument that seems as simple as me as that, as their story. I don't know how they make it. They try to make it through the headliners, and I don't know if they do. Apparently they don't for you. I know that. But
who's you?
What's that?
Who's you?
You point right at you.
Yeah, well, I thought this was weak from the beginning. Just the idea of it, when we didn't have any evidence, the more I learned, the weaker I think it gets. But yeah, I mean, you're right, and you don't see a lot of references to the international boxing. I don't believe, but the business models are different, and now we have sort of league versus league competition. And that,
call it a league.
I'm calling it a league.
There's no
I'm
MMA
calling it a league.
MMA does that. Do they have simple rule guidelines that give every fighter an equal chance like they would in the league?
Sometimes you just use easy words, especially when you're doing something for the public. I'm calling it a league.
Scott Coker calls it a league. It's not a goddamn league.
Okay, we need to get Carlos Silva in here and be like, we're a league.
I'm hitting mute so I don't disturb you for a while.
All right, wait. But league versus league, but people need to remember that's the essence of what this case is about. The essence of what this case is about is raising rivals' costs and foreclosing other rival MMA promoters. That is the economic essence of the case. And if you don't have that story locked down, you're not going to win. So it's that the UFC was able to, through long-term exclusive contracts, right, with fighters, venues, sponsors, TV networks, effectively raise rivals' costs to give sort of the UFC a long-term competitive advantage and help maintain and enhance their power now in the input market only. But that's what it's about, and so that doesn't really tie in as much to the international boxing when you look back on it. I'm guessing that's why we don't see as many references to it. But I don't.
You know, in an earlier filing, I think they differentiated international boxing from this particular case. I'm not sure if it was because of the time that international boxing was done, or the underlying factual elements of international boxing. So I'm not quite sure why that's not really brought.
My only theory can be is that because the title was a separate entity, you could bring up the collusion clause back then, and that the titles are owned by the promotions nowadays. Not nowadays, but in MMA, the titles are owned by the promotion. There's not a collusion factor involved,
right?
So that, I think that's the only explanation I can come up with. That probably might be the reason why they don't bring it up, because to me that's the simplest explanation. The UFC, that's, if you look at a lot of the boxing language and boxing cases, a lot of it applies to how the UFC behaves. They went in some of the depositions. Mersh, I think, said would never let a fighter get to his last contract. Or Silva said we're not going to let a Bellator guy come and fight our champion because that raises Bellator. Stuff like that. The whole point is retaining the value of their champion overall, right? And you put those stories together, it's like, yeah, the championship means something. At least the prestige of the top guy means something in the UFC. And then making sure he's locked in long-term contract, and then the top contenders have to be locked in long-term contract to get a shot at them, and then it just flows from there. That's International Boxing Club. But again, Is it illegal in MMA? Is it a monopoly thing in MMA nowadays? If you own the title, if you have monopoly on a title, I mean, it's not a separate entity. So I don't know if I guess you can have a monopoly because it's not a separate entity. There's no collusion.
And some of the things I want to point out about this, because as Jason said, it's about right. Are there genuine dispute of material facts? Did I say that right?
Let me. So it says in their brief, it's basically from the federal rules. A movement with the moving party shows that there is no general dispute as to any material fact, and therefore the moving party is entitled to judgment as a matter of law. Throughout the years, they've general issue material fact, general dispute as to any material fact, but basically what it boils down to is that there's no material facts to assert your claim. So that's basically the standard. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and a simple way I always think of it is just looking at the evidence in a light most favorable to the other guys, which would be the fighters here. Would no reasonable jury ever side with them? And if they wouldn't do that, then we don't need to go to trial. But so when you look at that, just a couple things I wanted to point out that might be issues down the line. The UFC is claiming that there was not a single witness that testified that they that the UFC's scheme or contracts or anything prevented them from having access to fighters. And they'll point to Shannon Knapp, they'll point to Carlos Silva, they'll point to things Scott Coker said. And I looked through some of them, and it didn't look like there was. I think who was the guy from IFL? He might have been a little bit negative. But if that stands up, that to me is really strong in these situations, especially when it said the essence of the case is that you're foreclosing your rival MMA promoters, and they're coming in and saying, yeah, no, we were able to compete with you. That didn't happen. That's kind of like Golden Boy when they couldn't find a single fighter to come in and say Al Heyman restricted them from using the promoter that they wanted to use.
Excellent point.
So there's that to watch out for down the line that could be really strong evidence. And what Jason was getting at, another reference with Golden Boy, was this market definition problem. And again, I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but I do want to tell you what the judge said in Golden Boy. He says, although the definition of the relevant market is generally a factual question for the jury, summary judgment is appropriate if plaintiff's evidence is insufficient to support a jury verdict as to that definition. And then he kind of went and just basically essentially said, I don't think you did a good job with this analysis. And so, and I'm putting it in this section. And what he specifically pointed to was the fact that Golden Boy's expert witness was defining the market based on fighters and based on whether they were championship caliber fighters. So when it came to their managers, if you were the manager of a championship caliber fighter, you were in the relevant market. But if your fighter was all of a sudden not championship caliber, all of a sudden you're not in the relevant market. And that didn't make any sense to him, that within like one day, one fight, you can be a manager who's a good substitute, and then all of a sudden you're not a manager who's a good substitute. Yeah. And that's what he was attacking. And so the UFC is trying to use that here, essentially, with defining the market about what promoters should be in the relevant market. And so they're claiming that the fighters define the market really based on fighters. Are you in the ranked group or the tracked group or the headline group, whatever? But they're saying, look, you should be focusing on the promoters, because the question is, if you suppress fighter pay, what other promoters will they switch to? And so sometimes you've got a promoter who's promoting like a ranked fighter, but then the next show, they might not be promoting ranked fighters. And there's a similar sort of thing. So that promoter is in the relevant market in one instance, and then if their show has no ranked fighters, all of a sudden they're not in the relevant market. They're trying to make that similar argument, which maybe will work for them. I'm not 100% sure, but they're trying to map that Golden Boy outcome ruling over to what's going on with Hal Singer and the way he's defining the relevant market. Yeah,
that's why I thought the International Boxing Club had a better definition, even though they tried to imitate it in the Golden Boy Championship, but they didn't quite. They made it a little nebulous. But International Boxing Club was very simple. There's the champion, and then they worked that way down for how value just kept going down. It doesn't even have to be a champion. It's the guy who recognized the champion. He has and you can point out the market that those guys make more than everybody else. They draw more, all that other stuff. It's pretty hard to argue. I think it's harder to argue against the champion having more value. There's also a prestige value. The title is something that's unique. The title's unique, and, you know, being the champion, the best, recognized best in the world. So that, I thought that's why that was stronger than trying to, you know, say, oh, this is headline, these top guys, and you go down, it doesn't, you know, that someone could flow in and out of the headliner status so simply. But the promoter wise, it's the other thing, what was I going to say about it that I found kind of fascinating in the one thing I thought was interesting, and this is one part I think will be easy for them to get rid of the plaintiffs, is the UFC brought up the point that they brought up what does it say, that what is it, that the UFC is not having more shows or less shows? I can't remember what it is. They're having more shows or not, a greater. What's that?
Oh, in the
they haven't increased their shows. They haven't increased the number of shows they're having.
They're saying their shows have been going up over time.
Yeah, the number of shows. But I think the part that would be easy for the plaintiffs to show is that the number of the shows in ABC territories by every other promoter has been decreasing over time. So that the market for MMA, that's one thing I think the plaintiffs will be pretty easy. I don't know if that's a big thing though. That doesn't really, I don't know if that plays a big part in the case. I'm just saying that's one thing I thought will be fairly simple to blow out.
I think there might be something on that. I have to go back and check. I think there already might be something on that. I can't recall off the top of my head.
Just to get back to Paul's point really quick, I think the one thing that I thought was interesting in reading the deposition transcripts of Scott Coker and Carlos Silva, especially Silva, they asked him pointed questions about, you know, did the UFC's dominance in the market help your promotion? And when it's not it seems like innocuous question, but it's more, the question is more a you know, this is the point where you say yes, it had, you know, and he says no, it actually has helped. It has helped World Series of Fighting. And it's like, how about sponsors, you know? And that's the point where you think that Carlos Silva will say, you know, sponsors, yeah, we haven't been able to get sponsors, but no, again, he goes, no, it's helped us, our visibility in getting sponsors. So all of these, you know, the irony of, you know, the complaint by the plaintiffs, where you get the embedded picture of Dana White holding a headstone about they buried all these promotions, and now you get the testimony where the promoters are saying, you know what, the UFC's actually helped us. I mean, in Scott Coker's deposition as well, you know, he wasn't as gave contrary evidence, but he was more along the lines of, they do their thing, we're not affected by what they do.
The plaintiff should have showed Coker the Dana White comments about Bellator is promoting Bellator and Strikeforce before they brought him on. But I get, this shows you, I think this is the part that shows you how badly it hurt the plaintiffs for witnesses for deposition, is when Bjorn Rebsny started the MAAA. You know, you think that's probably the one guy they probably wanted on the stand based on his what his actions were. You're thinking he probably had the most to say, and now you can't. They obviously they don't trust him as a witness, or they don't think he's a friendly witness or a good witness. They didn't bring him up, or they didn't ask for him to be deposed.
I don't believe so. Yeah.
So if I remember, was he originally on the list of people they were going to talk to? They said.
I think so.
So suddenly it was someone they wanted to, and then he starts MAAA, and they accuse him of trying to
undermine.
Trying to use that to somehow interject himself into the suit, and now he's no longer on the stand. So.
But really quick too, Jason brings up a good point that I always come back to, and probably one of the reasons that I think the UFC has generally has a stronger case here. Although we need to see, I'm not going to be set on that until we see how the fighters respond. But the story's got to fit. I say this all the time, like the economic story's got to fit. And if what you're doing is really hurting rival MMA promoters, they're not going into depositions saying, oh yeah, no, nothing's going on here. Oh, it's fine. Oh yeah, they helped us get sponsors. And that's where like just the story doesn't fit. Other MMA promoters should hate what's going on if it's truly happening. And so something strange. Carlos Silva was the most positive out of all the people that we could see excerpts from. You're almost like, does he want to work for the UFC later or something? What's going on here?
I guess that's why I thought you know, if you go back, you got to go back to my old comments back in the old days of Bloody Elbow. A lot of the stuff's just straight from there. Is the point of it, if you focus on the top guys, the championship, almost like a boxing model, that this is the most important element, and you get the locked in, and then everybody has to fight to get that position. Because in MMA, it's like every sport, that to become a superstar, a star, a big moneymaker, unless you're a Brock Lesnar, and even he had to kind of do it, unless you're a CM Punk or a Kimbo, who has huge fame outside MMA. MMA is a ladder sport. You rise up by beating the guy ahead of you above until you reach the top. And then you might get such prestige that you can retain it for a while, but you don't get it. I mean, even Conor McGregor was not doing pay-per-views right away. It was when he finally got on to fight the titles, became this mega star. Brock became a much bigger star when he fought for the title. So that's how MMA works. And I think that's the mistake, because if you group all promoters into it equally, no, the key promoters were people like Pride, WEC, and Strikeforce. Why? Because each of them, they're the only ones, Bellator a little bit, but not nearly as close. Those are the only ones at the time that had those type of fighters that you could argue, based on the lineage of the sport, that those guys were the top of their divisions. And no one else can do that. And when the UFC bought them and foreclosed them, that would be your argument. They foreclosed them and absorbed the top guys in the fighter from those promotions, the top lightweight guy, the top lightweight and less and WEC, the top the Fedor Japanese link and lightweight link with Strikeforce had some of arguably the best guys, and then with Pride obviously was the one that was actually considered superior to a lot of fans at the time. Without them, no one had access to something that would potentially could contest the UFC as being the best fighter in the world. And then everybody had to go to the UFC. And then at that point, they became the standard bearer. They became the market standard, and all other promoters started imitating the contracts UFC used, which they got from boxing. I don't think that's not a mystery. Everybody knows that Epstein just basically ripped off all elements from boxing, put it in. And so everybody started imitating the UFC. So why the industry standard that you see everybody else using is they use because the UFC was using it. And that's a simple argument. But again, I don't know why no one can make that argument. I think it has to go back to the fact that it technically is not illegal to make your own titles.
Yeah.
And that opens up a can of worm there.
We need to get Jeff Aronson in here, who would argue vehemently with John about what he just said about fighters and notoriety and all that. Yeah. If you looked at his deposition.
Yeah,
I'll put our fighters up against anyone.
Like, we have the best in the world. Yeah, but no one recognizes them as the best. Who recognizes, any of your guys as the best? No one. Sorry. I'm sorry to say that. No one. But it will be interesting. One thing interesting we know from the deposition, actually two other things. One is ONE FC apparently is worth $1 billion, which is absurd on all levels. The other thing that's interesting is I almost owe the UFC an apology, because based on stuff I've seen, I've been very suspicious of how much they supposedly lost before they tough, right? Based on stuff I've seen, because we have some documents that came up from Deutsche Bank that they didn't lose basically lost no money in 2004. Some other stuff hinted otherwhere. So it doesn't, like, that 44 million sounds like a myth, very inflated, but in here they do bring up that the UFC lost tens of millions. Epstein brought up that they lost 30, 40, 50 million. What I always thought would be a strong argument for plaintiffs and stuff would be that the UFC is based a lot of smoke and mirrors. It's all myth. The idea that they've made the rules and they spent all this money they didn't spend, but it looks like they might have spent that money. So maybe it's good advice that they didn't follow my advice, because then they would have gone in a whole direction that they would have got in trouble. So maybe the Fertittas really did spend those tens of millions, and I was wrong, but I was only going off what was available. So there.
You're finally coming around when he says it under oath, and there's probably financials behind the scenes somewhere. 30 to 50. Well,
I've seen some financials that don't add up to that. That's why I made that, like, that doesn't quite add up. How do you lose all that money and not lose 2004? I just don't know how they spent that kind of money in 2001, 2, and 3. That's the crazy thing. What were you spending the money on? But they did spend it, apparently.
Yeah. What opening do you see for the fighters in this, Jason? I think, because it sounds like you agree with me that it was a strong opening for the UFC.
Yeah, it's a strong opening for the UFC. Obviously, the other thing is, the overarching thing is like, oh yeah, we got this motion Dauber hearing. So if the court grants our motion excluding all of the expert testimony, then forget what we just said. it will not exist, and you can go ahead and dismiss this case, immediately. Obviously, the quantification from Singer's expert report, the wage share versus wage level, is going to be a huge thing that they're going to have to rebut. It seems like it's just going to come down to that report as far as whether or not there is, whether his analysis is correct. I also think that I don't quite remember when they dismissed the monopoly claim, because I don't think they did, and I think that correct, they haven't dismissed the monopoly claim.
No, they didn't dismiss it. They were saying that they didn't even mention it in the class certification, so they abandoned it.
So basically, they made up a fact and then asserted their own fact. So the UFC, that's something the UFC will have to.
Sorry, and one that I didn't double check yet, but I should. That in one of the Daubert filings, that they said something like, "We're only seeking damages for lower fighter compensation," and something about the. God, I should look that up.
Okay. But anyway, I think that it'll be interesting what they do say about that. But as far as their strengths, they'd have to talk about the market. They've correctly set forth the market. What will be interesting will be how much they look at the template made in the Golden Boy decision, because it seems as though, like you were talking about, they look back and say, what's the most recent thing that we could look upon, and that's analogous to here, and it's the Golden Boy case. And so what will be interesting, and I'll be doing when I see the opposition brief, is going back to see what they thought would have worked on Golden Boy's part when they responded to Heyman's motion for summary judgment in that case. It's going to. They'll also look at the opinion made by the court and the judge in that case as well. So it'll be interesting to see how they attack this. There's still room for them to make, and judges are very hesitant to grant summary judgment outright. Simply because of a number of reasons. One, they want to make sure that they don't get appealed. Two, they will also want to make sure that all the parties have litigated the case to the fullest extent, meaning that everyone's had an opportunity, and there won't be an appeal. So there's still a lot of time left here.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple things I was thinking about too, and I forgot about. And one is one of the arguments that Zuffa makes, which is actually a pretty good argument, is they make the case that the wage share, that's one thing I thought was good. They made the case that the wage share is a standard that can't hold up in antitrust suits because it infringes on a corporation's or entity's ability to be innovative or however they phrase it. But it says you can't use wage share because that's just unfair based on whatever the revenue is. It doesn't make sense. But it's one I think that's the plaintiff should have a pretty easy chance of going after, because they're going to argue that we're not making the argument that that it's all rules should be based on this. They're going to bring up that it's a standard in sports. And I think another one they could even bring up is like there's no NFL, NBA under collective bargaining agreements have to do wage shares splits, and it doesn't seem to do anything about their innovation. So that's one place I saw an opening. Then I just want to bring it up because I thought about it earlier, and then I forgot, and then I'm like, okay, I better bring that up. So that's not that had anything to do with your last comment. I just wanted to get that out.
That's funny.
Yeah, and I'll throw in that I wouldn't call it a standard in sports, but usually when sports economists write articles that deal with the idea of monopsony power, they'll often reference wage share, but it's not used as evidence of wage share, but of monopsony power, but they'll reference it as sort of as a supporting fact. And when economists actually try to study these things, they use Mincer regressions, which are used with actual wages, and that's what the UFC is going to say. But really quick, I found that thing that that I was looking for. It says plaintiffs seek to recover only for undercompensation. So Zuffa's monopoly power is not relevant to their theory of injury, but only to show additional anti-competitive effect. Oh, I see. I need to look at this more.
But that goes back to the argument that the plaintiff's argument that the UFC has a monopoly, because they have monopoly, they enact monopsony power.
It might not be fully abandoned. Let's see.
Yeah, so you were wrong. We gotta
go to the source.
That's how I
assumed you were right. I made an ass of both you and me. God,
that's how I read some of my briefs. I got him. Oh, wait a second.
I got to be honest. I just stand for our name.
We'll see. Although the monopoly broth thing might be gone. Again, we have to say Mike because we can't see everything. But the UFC keeps pointing out that that Singer didn't do any analysis of what's the right words that they use?
Identity rights?
No. For venue. Oh, here. That he didn't do any analysis of to suggest suitable venues are not available for competing MMA promotions. Same thing for sponsors and TV outlets. So they're basically trying to say, look, you can argue this monopoly broad, but he didn't do any analysis. So the facts of the case are that he didn't do anything to show that this is an additional factor. Again, we can't see everything, so it's hard to know whether that's exactly true or not. But that monopoly broth could be gone. Although I don't think they needed it in the first place. This is all about those fighter contracts in my mind.
This is key. Well, it's fighter contracts, and then I think acquiring certain key promotions. Well, I guess that's not the case. That's the case I would have made, not the case they perhaps made, but that's a key promotion. I think that's a key element. But people are watching the show for expert opinion to really understand the case, and we are dropping the ball big time. Apparently we skimmed through all the documents, and we don't remember half of it. So.
Yeah, could I just throw out, there's a lot to go through.
Oh, ton, yeah.
And remember everything, and we're not really getting paid for this. It's not our full-time job.
I read a NAM-FAM declaration and a James Volkman declaration from 2011. So,
and were they identical?
They were identical. They were basically, they're actually interesting thing. They have how many exhibits they have? Like 100 and something exhibits. They go through there's a list of maybe 15, 20 fighters declarations, which basically say the same thing in about 2011. So I don't know what was going on, but basically
FTC investigation 2011.
Oh, there you go. There's a paragraph where it says, I don't see anything wrong with the UFC purchasing Strikeforce. In fact, I think it would be better. It would be best for the sport of MMA. I mean, essentially, that was the paragraph. There's one paragraph in there that was the same on most of those fighters' declaration. So
I got to look through if all those people told me the same afterwards.
Yeah.
But so let me ask you a question on that. If the fighters want to shoot holes in that, right? That's going to be used as UFC supporting evidence unless they can bring in some of those fighters under oath and say that's not what I really thought, right? Is that what they're going to have to do?
Well, no, they could just oppose it by bringing on their own declarations of other fighters, saying, I don't know. They could just say, the Strikeforce merger with the UFC really diminished my ability to become a free agent within the MMA market. That kind of thing. I was forced to go to the UFC. I wasn't able to go. There weren't any competing offers for me, so I took the UFC's offer. That kind of thing. So, I mean, the one thing that should be pointed out is it depends on the court, but the accumulation of declarations should not matter. If you have 5 on one side and 1 on the other, it shouldn't really matter that the 5 shouldn't outweigh the 1 just because the one side has only 1 declaration and the other person has 5. You could just mass produce all these declarations from all these fighters. So that should not affect how they weigh the case. Although we go back to Golden Boy, and the court, in its opinion dismissing the Golden Boy case, states that, hey, 6 fighters submitted declarations on behalf of Al Heyman. No fighters submitted declarations on behalf of Golden Boy.
Right.
So I don't see what, no one came forward. So that is a head scratcher to me on that case.
Well, I wonder if they went back and talked to guys like Jacob Volkman or Phil Davis, who's with Zinc Entertainment, and the plaintiffs, that is. I wonder if we could get.
Did they go back and talk to them?
If they just said, hey, I mean, if it was that important, I can't imagine. I'm believing you could probably get letters from those guys that are.
Well, I mean, obviously they could also say, hey, that's a 2011 before,
Well, I'm just saying, if you want to make the arguments under if it was necessary,
yeah,
I'm sure you could go back and you could find a fighter in that group that one of them. I mean, Brandon Vera is one of the guys that has it signed.
Yeah,
you could say it was signed under at least they thought it was signed under duress.
I would think you would want it from at least someone who's not a plaintiff, but
yeah, that's why I thought Jacob Volkman. Remember, he left and just really hated the UFC when he left, and Phil Davis is went to Bellator and with Zinker Entertainment, Bob Cook and stuff. Who I'm just imagining that there's someone in there amongst all those people that you could find someone to change their to make a claim of some sort, like, yeah, that's not really what I thought, or I changed my opinion, or who knows.
And of course,
they needed it.
Yeah, those declarations were so old.
Is because we haven't had that. I'm guessing that they probably don't need it. They don't feel they need to do that. That's my guess. But I could be wrong. What do I know? I'm just the third guy in here with no expertise. So.
Well, we don't know that they haven't done it. That's what we're going to see.
Yeah,
in weeks,
that's
right?
true.
We should see if they're included.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not, that would be quite.
Okay, since we know so little about the case, maybe we should go to stuff in the filings that we found interesting that had nothing to do with the merits of the case, but were just interesting tidbits that people might have missed. Like, I thought it was interesting that what Scott Coker was apparently offering Tito Ortiz as a contract under his deposition in 2009 when he tried to lure him to Strikeforce.
Did I miss that? What was
that?
What did he offer him?
Well, apparently I got the unredacted one. No, I'm just kidding you. No, he was offering. He supposedly made a pitch to Tito Ortiz instead of the usual deal where you give a guy money and pay-per-view points. It was more of a partnership, which sounds more like a boxing deal where he'd get a percentage of the total revenue of the event. And that was the pitch he made. And so I thought that was I just found it was kind of interesting insight of what he was trying to do to get fighters at the time.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and it meshes with his contract for Rampage and supposedly what he was offering Gilbert Melendez.
Yeah.
Well, that was Bjorn that offered them.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Bjorn, but Rampage wasn't a partnership. It was still the typical deal. You look at that contract; it was money up front with pay-per-view points. Yes.
I have the worst habit of just assuming Scott Coker has been at Bellator forever. I don't know why.
I was just going through his deposition also, and he was talking about how when they approached him to take over Bellator, he didn't know who Kevin Kay was.
Yes, and he also thought it was the Titanic. He compared it to.
Yeah. That was it. Yeah, he compared it. Yeah, it was terrible. They hated the tournament format. The whole thing. Yeah.
The whole thing was basically promoters very subtly shitting on other promoters. With Dana White, like, oh, they don't know how to promote over there, which is talking about Coker and Bellator. Yeah. Coker talking about how Rebney didn't do a job. I'm sure if they brought Rebney in, he would have hammered Dana White. And so.
But the ironic thing is, when they needed them to shit on each other, they didn't in the deposition.
Well, what'll be interesting, and this is tangibly related, if you notice since the lawsuit was filed, all the actions, and this is not proof. There's no proof of this. We're only going because we haven't seen it. Them taking these actions. It's an absence of proof that's proving it. But ever since the lawsuit was filed, we haven't seen the UFC take the actions that are described in the suit as what they do, and abusing their monopoly power. In other words, we haven't seen I haven't heard of fighters getting tolling provisions like they used to. I haven't heard of fighters. The UFC hasn't used their matching clause. In fact, bizarrely enough, Lyoto Machida got an offer from Bellator, came to the UFC, got an offer from them, and then the UFC wasn't a matching offer; it was just an offer, which you don't see that usually in the past. So all the stuff that the plaintiffs are arguing about, the UFC doesn't seem to be doing. Don't know if it's because of the lawsuit or not, but they just don't seem to be doing it. Same with the UFC doesn't seem to be signing fighters before their last fight. Eddie Alvarez even had kind of a talk with Luke Thomas, made it sound like there wasn't really even an offer until he finished his contract. I'm just wondering if the plaintiffs lose this, I wonder if Bellator is going to suddenly wake up tomorrow and find out the UFC is like, you know what, all that stuff we can start doing again.
Did they match Aljamain Sterling or no?
What's that?
Did they
No,
match
Aljamain just didn't get a good enough offer from Bellator and came back to UFC.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming they have to still be tolling people like injured fighters. You don't think they're doing
that I think they do. They toll some, but there's not to the degree they used to. They used to do. I mean, even in the lawsuit, there's an excerpt. They said they'd automatically send it out or something weird like that. They suggested Silva.
Yeah.
I used to hear about this all the time, where guys would say, their managers or fighters say, "Yeah, I'd get my fight I'd have all these extensions at the end." I don't hear that anymore. Barring, I think a guy actually holding out.
And there's even a text message between Sean Shelby and some fighter, and the fighter says, "Can you tell me if I'm going to be shelved again for 6 months?" And then Shelby goes, "Just got done with a fight in Germany. I wonder where I'm at, blah, blah. Plan on getting back in within 4 months. Okay, thanks for the info." So they got him in faster, I guess. But I think that's that statement that stands out, right? Can you tell me if I'm going to be shelved again for 6 months?
Yeah, in 6 months. Well, I mean, 6 months is the contract, the basic phase, but guys who go longer. I mean, there's always reports. Even the famous case of Brandon Vera supposedly got, when he was the famous freeze outs of Brandon Vera at the end of his contract back in 2007 or 8. 2007, I think it was. And he's renegotiating. He thought he had his last fight coming up, and suddenly he got a notice, according to that suit back then, that, "Oh no, you have like 9 more months or 6 more months under contract." He's like, shocked. And they've said, "Oh, you were injured at this time." And then Arlovsky and Horta, the two they bring up. But you don't hear anything like that anymore. Fighters just, their contract, the date their contracts are up, they're up. There's no perpetual guys in retirement like there used to be. The guys seem to be let go, except for GSP. GSP was the one there seemed to be some pushback. But everybody else, it's not happening anymore. So I wonder if Coker and them are ready because things are going good. There seems to be some fighters available. They're signing them. If the case gets settled in favor of the UFC, the next day you start seeing all those things that they seem to be refraining from doing right now start coming back. Like, the free agency is, it's no longer what it was.
It is possible. That's one of the things you see with these types of lawsuits. Even if you don't win, you generally see these types of changes. I'm just thinking of like Visa used to not allow its merchants to steer towards debit cards from credit cards, and as part of a lawsuit, if I'm recalling correctly, they eventually allowed them to steer. And then they used to have like no discounts for cash, and then I believe as part of a lawsuit, you got discounts for cash and no surcharge rule. I think that's gone these days, and I think that ended up being gone again as part of an antitrust lawsuit. So again, even if you don't win or even win big, you can still see these sort of marginal changes thrown in there.
Yeah, I mean, again, we have no real evidence this is because of the suit, but it just seems very convenient that all this started when the suit was filed. And again, from the UFC's point of view, they might not even think they're doing anything wrong, but it's like, why take the risk of extra damages? That's why risk it? If this is what they're talking about, this is going to be damages. Well, let's just not even do that and add more damages to us if things don't go our way. It's a very simple thing to refrain from for a while.
So basically they're not Donald Trump, right? Yeah. They're good boys while they're under the microscope, instead of just going all crazy and drawing even more attention to himself. They're not saying this lawsuit is a rigged witch hunt.
No collusion. There's
no collusion. Yes, that's
collusion is not legal. Is legal though.
Yeah.
Collusion is legal now, so maybe the promoters are okay.
That would be great if they were being sued for collusion. We didn't collude, but even if we did, it would be legal. It's okay.
Well, this is the one people always talk about collusion and the Trump thing. This is the one case. This is the one field that collusion is actually possible because collusion is an antitrust.
Exactly.
Law.
Maybe that's why Dana White visited the White House.
It has to do with it's an economic crime. So this is the one field like, oh, they did collude. Oh shit, we found an actual crime. That was a. He colluded with Trump, the UFC, during the affliction. I don't know, just.
So should we wrap this up? Do we have anything
because
else?
we're obviously not giving good advice to people since we didn't really too much stuff to read to really figure it out. And it's beyond my pay. I'll be honest, it's way beyond my pay grade. So we expect more out of you two.
We did get one tweet for a question for John though.
We did?
Yeah. It's from our guy. From our guy at Fistiano's podcast.
Fistiano's podcast.
It's our friend over there. He said, please cover why you think the UFC is still doing 12 pay-per-views a year and the effects of PPP fatigue when WWE and boxing seem to be moving away from the sub 250K PPP model, unless Showtime throws that in my face this fall.
I wrote a whole article about this about a couple of weeks ago. You can look it up. Bloody elbow. Very simply, though, the reason the UFC keeps their pay-per-views is they still make, even with the new ESPN deal, anything over, I think it's 140,000 buys or something is equivalent to what they're probably going to make on ESPN. And on top of that, the 12 pay-per-views give them, I think for the UFC's sake, I think they want to keep at least a dozen pay-per-views because one, it's still, maybe they're a little paranoid about this. It still gives them a means to block anybody else from entering the pay-per-view market because you can either stack a show that month so you can take people's money away so they don't have as much to spend on pay-per-view than the rival. Also, I'm very confident the UFC has some sort of restrictions on pay-per-view providers that if they're providing a UFC pay-per-view, that they have some sort of restrictions on what they can spend on advertising or broadcasting of other pay-per-views. There's just a lot of talking to people that did the Bellator and Affliction pay-per-views. A lot of things convinced me of that. And third thing is I think the UFC is saving it because they want to retain the value of the pay-per-views because they're going to monetize it later, maybe on Fight. They'll put it on Fight Pass and jack up the Fight Pass subscription rate to $20 a month, and that's $240 million a year. They've just recouped all their pay-per-view money right then. So they're doing something. They want to retain that monetary value of the pay-per-views. They don't want to water down that value by giving it away or getting rid of them. They still think it's by keeping it a separate thing, it has value. That's a guess, that last part too. But
you don't necessarily drop your pay-per-view when your star power is sort of at its lowest. I think you'd also wait to see if you get new stars in, if you get your numbers back. But
I mean, the idea was you drop from 12 pay-per-views to 6.
Yeah,
you're going to do the huge numbers you're never going to do huge numbers on all 12, but I think they want to retain the idea that pay-per-views are special. Mm-hmm. And and then when pay-per-views really start dying, you could put on you could say buy Fight Pass and you get all the pay-per-views, all the Conor McGregor, whoever the next Ronda Rousey is, and all the ones that do subpar. But the value is there because you're going to want to keep it every month. And so we can charge you $20-25 a month and we'll make a fortune here. And now we've just made all of our pay-per-view money again now on a subscription basis, our own subscription basis. So and if the UFC isn't thinking of doing that, hey, I just gave you a great idea.
And John had a back and forth with Ian Kidd on this. That was fun to read.
I smacked that.
I love you guys both. You guys are both great. Yeah, I thought you edged that, John. Jason, go ahead. What are you adding in?
Oh no, there was one more. John, can you talk about the death of cinema?
Oh yeah, well, cinema is it's dead. It's a long, slow death. It's very sad. It's going to end up being like the fighter pilot of the 20th century or the armored knight. It's a thing of the past that we'll look back fondly in memory, but it's not. The 2-hour self-contained feature is no longer the artistic high point that it once was. Mass culture. So I'm very depressed. Thank you, whoever wrote that. Thank you for depressing me. Anyways, we should move on.
Movies have sucked lately.
No, the movies are dead, and it's the 2-hour feature. I shouldn't say they're dead, but they used to be cultural touchstones that everybody would talk about a movie, and now it's, besides the mega blockbuster Marvel movies and everything else, those are just TV shows. They're just a 2-hour block of a TV show, and then you got to wait for the next one that comes out a few months later, and it's a continuation of the TV show.
So are you an independent filmmaker guy? Do you like the film fests or
not really anymore? But I'm a big film nut. I grew up, I work in the film industry for frick's sake. It's terrible out here. It's depressing.
But there's no good independent films.
There's a lot of good movies made, but they don't get an audience like they used to. It's very hard to get an audience because 10,000 films are being made. And also the budgets have collapsed because all the money is going into the big blockbusters. Disney only makes like 10 movies a year, and they're all giant blockbusters. So other studios are doing the same. So all the money goes into making those movies. Whatever they have left over, they could maybe make smaller films, but then they're not going to advertise those smaller films because they have to make sure the big blockbusters make money. So all the advertising money goes in the big blockbusters. And on top of that, the big blockbusters, they have to demand they get all the screen space because they have to make that money back. So there's no room for the small pictures, which because there's no room, they're not going to put any advertising in. It's a catch-22 like several times over. It's the end of, and that's why it's the end of the 2-hour block movie. We're getting very few. When's the last time you saw kind of a mass appeal? I shouldn't even say like Silence of the Lambs it wasn't made to be an Academy Award winner. It was made to be a mass appeal movie. And yet it was mass appeal and it got nominated. You just don't see those type of features being made anymore. And we've really gone way off left field about that movie. We should be talking about MMA movies. And let me say, MMA movies are all shit. There hasn't been one good one.
Yeah. So what did you think about the McGregor documentary? No, I'm just kidding.
Let's move on to another subject matter speaking of pay-per-views and stuff, we now know Bellator. See how I'm saving the show single-handedly here. Bellator is now signed a deal with DAZN. DAZN, who gave Eddie Hearn $125 million a year to put boxing on it. There seems to be a massive move towards streaming for combat sports. Besides Bellator and DAZN and Eddie Hearn's Matchroom on DAZN, you got the World Boxing Super Series on DAZN, and on ESPN, you now have a massive UFC deal along with the Top Rank deal. So is the future, I guess, what does this tell us and what does this mean for combat sports? Let's go to Jason first.
Oh, gosh. It's, you thought you were cutting the cord and saving money, but you actually are not now because there's going to be so much subscription-based things you'll want to pay for. You got ESPN Plus, you got DAZN, you got Fight Pass, you got all these other things. It's really kind of harsh for the consumer from my perspective. I think though, from the business perspective of Bellator DAZN, it helps out. One thing that I think that is kind of curious is the non-exclusivity of some of the Bellator events, right? Because what you got 2 events coming up. Rory McDonald against who am I thinking? Musasi, and then you got Rampage and whoever he's fighting. Who's Rampage fighting? Who is Rampage Jackson? Who's he fighting? I don't know. Anyway,
Anderley Silva.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Those are exclusive to DAZN. I think those 2 are exclusive to DAZN, but you do get Fedor Sonnen. It's on DAZN and on Paramount. So, I'm not quite sure. If you're a Bellator fan, you could maybe hold out and just, watch on Paramount. It might be good to, if you're a boxing combat sports fan, if you're into Anthony Joshua and things like and Matchroom boxing fighters, and he's done a great job of signing up a stable of fighters to get geared up for this. But you'll have to be wanting to pay $10 a month for it. So we'll see how it does in the United States. What do you guys think?
Go ahead, John.
Okay. I couldn't find my unmute button there for a second. I'm interested in a couple of things. One is that it's supposedly $100 million over 4 years, or is it 5 years or 4 years? 100 million. So that's $25 million a year. That would mark a pretty big increase for Bellator. If the money is for the 7 shows that are unique to Bellator, that's like $3 million a show or 3.5. That's a large amount of money for a non-UFC. That's a huge amount of money for a non-UFC promoter. And almost all that money can go to fighter purses because other promoters don't have the profit margins UFC does. So that gives them a lot of money to work with. But the question I have is all that money earmarked for just those 7 shows, or is it also include the 15 shows that are for both Bellator and Paramount simulcast? Does that cover part of that? In other words, is Bellator saving money on the Paramount side by letting 15 shows also play on Paramount and on DAZN, and using some of that money to cover their own costs, to cut it in half, trying to get the best of both worlds. If that's the case, then it's not as great a deal. But I think it also shows you one thing's interesting is you look at the amount of money going in streaming, especially in boxing. You have DAZN getting Eddie Hearn getting 125 million. We don't know what World Boxing Super Series is getting per year. ESPN talk, it's got a lot of upside. It's a deal for Arum, and if he drives in subscribers, he gets much more money. But the talk I've heard, it's at least 50 million a year for him. He's showing Showtime, HBO. Basically, boxing altogether has about as much revenue from the streaming and TV broadcasts, depending on what PBC gets from Fox, as UFC and Bellator are probably getting from theirs. Where UFC and Bellator together are probably what, 340 million a year, guessing, 300 based on what we know, and all the boxing stuff put together is pretty close to that. The only difference is that boxing, they're paying like 60% of their revenue out to their boxers, and UFC is paying a lot less. So that's the one difference, is there's going to be a huge bidding war on the boxing side we're not going to see on the MMA side. And you already can hear it. Boxers are excited about all and their managers surely are very excited about all these channels. The promoters are still jerks that want all these options on their contracts, but there's guys that were making $1 million a fight are now going to be making $2 to $3 million a fight if they jump to Eddie Hearn. He's already made offers of that ballpark figure. So, look forward to the next year or two until it all burns out and a couple go out of business of massive increases in boxing payouts. So that's my takeaway from it. I don't know, Paul.
And that's the thing I wanted to see also, right? As we're in the infancy of this shift to individualized packages for consumers and OTT and stuff like that, you get a lot of money through these things. What I'm more interested in is what's the second deal for Bellator down the line once some of these things shake out. But that being said, $100 million was a lot more than I would have guessed Bellator would get for something like that. And I always go back to it's the first, to me, the first solid sort of financial information that we got on Bellator, because we always, John has information that he's probably not going to share here about things he hears about them, because he doesn't want Scott Coker to angrily call and text him or something like that. But you always hear that they're losing money, and you don't always know on the television side, like what Spike is paying them, given that Bellator is owned by Viacom. So
yeah, is that a real TV revenue they're making? Is that
right?
Is that the market demands the price, or is that just the price they whimsically decided that would look best on the balance sheet?
You can price things in funny ways, yeah, to put kind of the incremental profits wherever you want them to be. But this was the first solid information, and 100 million was a lot more than I expected. So that, again, helping going to compete for fighters should be good. Hopefully, we'll see. Bellator claimed that they won 100% of every fighter they went after in this lawsuit. I don't know if I believe that. Did you see that?
Yeah,
they claim 100%.
That's why I don't. Yeah. Anyway,
I guess the question is, did that they won 100% of the fighters went after? What's the UFC's record? Because they also could be 100% because they might not have gone after those guys.
Right. Yeah. It was just an interesting claim. I was like, really?
Yeah. The one thing Bellator, if Bellator is going to do anything in the competition department, kind of now's the time. They have to increase their revenues a lot because they're still, even at the UFC's weight. If we're going by wage share, UFC's wage share is so low. In Bellator, if they can make more money, they might be able to match that. But the time is now, because they might be in trouble going forward, because when that new TV deal kicks in, the UFC suddenly got a lot more money to work with, because they're going to hit all their projections at that point. They've been very, they have very aggressive projections they're working off of. And so it almost gets the feeling that they've been constrained on what they're willing to spend, because they want to make sure they get that, 30, 40% EBITDA now, before the next TV deal. And then the next TV deal, they can easily hit 40% EBITDA levels with the next TV deal, and then have money left over and still make it by outbidding Bellator. Where before they're like, they might have decided like, well, we're very constrained what we're willing to spend because we want our earnings to be so high. We will let this fighter go because we're not going to raise, even though he adds to our MRV. We are not going to. I see Paul laughing in the background.
No, I'm laughing just because I guarantee you nobody in the UFC offices is saying he adds to our MRP.
Well, I'm using it, yeah, but no one in the real world uses that. But
Right.
They would say, hey, even though he would give us, even though by paying this much, he actually brings us more in return. We expect so much in earnings, we can't take that risk. We're not going to give him that money.
Right.
But we know they don't pay a lot of their. I mean, you did a whole study that you're working on, and no way is Conor McGregor making close to what he's bringing into the UFC.
Yeah, I can't wait to get that more finalized. But yeah, it was and it's not fully finalized yet, but the results were a little different than what I expected. I think you and I talked about it. We both expected that it's the top fighters that drive the vast majority of the revenue. And if anything, some of the low level,
you were surprised how much the undercard is driving some of it?
No, but just to say what our original thoughts were, and that if anything, it's the lower level fighters who might actually technically be overpaid a little bit. And I did kind of find that, yeah, there's a good chunk of fighters that don't, based on that analysis, don't drive any additional content revenues. This is ignoring ticket sales and merchandising. But and the top fighters drive a lot. But what I was surprised about was that one notch below the top fighters, that there's appears to be a good amount of fighters in there who you wouldn't consider sort of stars, who drive a lot more revenue than I thought they would have. At least that's what it appears. But there's also a chunk that appear to pretty much not drive any. Hey, that was an aside.
That's not.
And it's a draft.
We got to wait for that's a teaser to what he's working on, so we can get.
But it actually could be relevant to class certification when you think about it, right?
Yeah. Well, now we're on to a weird tangent here, but the class, you think about it, that goes back to my argument before, is that the top guys drive all the value, the next guys come in to make the value, and then the purpose of signing more and more guys further down the line is you add a barrier to entry because you can't get the guys necessary who will be considered the top guy. That'd be the what I call the International Boxing Club of New York argument. So that would work with yours. Of course, that doesn't seem to be direction that anybody wanted to go. They didn't read our old notes in the old Bloody Elbow comments. So,
Oh wait, and another quick aside: have you heard anything back about your? John injected himself into the antitrust lawsuit, trying to get UFC documents unsealed. Have you heard anything back on that?
No, I just saw that it was just the filings that they mentioned it in. So yeah, I haven't heard anything about that. They might have thrown it out, ignored it. I don't know. I only reason I wrote it because no one else would write it. I talked to these guys about it, and they were too lazy.
I cannot wait for the hearing where John goes in and testifies.
Oh, you'll be subpoenaed. They'll bring you
a telephone hearing, whatever, anything. That would be.
I only do it. I'll have to be remote. I'm not going to Vegas.
What if you?
Summer thing. What do you think, Vegas? Oh man, that'd be
when you get commanded to go, you will go.
Hear and fail, not your peril. That was
But we'll see. I mean, I thought I made a decent case. It just, thankfully, there was a lot of evidence from you guys because you guys were also complaining about there was not enough stuff released, the redacted material.
It's actually relevant because that's happening also in the Mark Hunt lawsuit.
Mark, exactly. What's strange is Mark Hunt is I'm not sure I see the point of why the UFC is fighting so hard to keep his contract from being made public.
It makes no sense. That whole renew. So just to let you guys, we're tailing off into the abyss right now. But basically, the Mark Hunt lawsuit. The UFC has renewed a motion to seal portions of Mark Hunt's promotional contract. The court had originally denied it, but they are, wanting them to review it again, which will not fly really well.
And they're trying to use that. Would you say that they're fighting it really hard? I mean, I think they would always fight the release of any financial information, but are you thinking they're fighting it extra hard because they also want to reference it this
is what's happening because maybe indirectly through John's letter to the court, they may there might be an opening if they allow that to go. In the Hunt case, to allow the contract to be revealed. Is that something that can be used in the antitrust lawsuit by the plaintiffs' attorneys? I mean, they're looking. It's all relative, and it's all our fault.
Oh, and I'll throw in one other thing that sucked was, so Golden Boy Al Heyman, when summary judgment came around, there was a ton of documents. Nothing was redacted. Nothing was sealed, I believe. Nothing was redacted, that's for sure. It was awesome.
Correct.
You saw everything. And I was like, oh, please, on this one, because it's a just positive motion. Maybe we'll get to see. And they're just like, no, F you guys. We're sealing, we're redacting. And on top of that, they made it so you couldn't even copy paste out of those damn documents. Did you guys catch that?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm like, come on, guys.
The other thing is, I don't know if you had this problem, but there's something seems to be corrupt about the Lorenzo Fertitta deposition. Because every time I open it, it just freezes my screen for like, every time I touch it, it freezes for a minute or two.
Oh, really?
It drive me nuts. I'd get pixelization on it and stuff. There's obviously something corrupt about that file.
Yeah, I think it just depends on which ones you open and stuff. So
just frustrating. But hopefully, hopefully justice prevails, and I did my Elmer Gentry thing, and I get the or my Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Any sort of single man that fights the system, and I get everything released, and we can work with it, and we'll have plenty of articles for weeks to come.
This is going to land in an exhibit somewhere. It's a video. Someone's going to cite this.
Well, so
Elmer Gentry. We're talking about it some more. We're going to get all our quotes.
Look how much they're talking about it. We're talking about it because we have, we're piecing stuff together from so little. What the heck?
Paul Gibbs said it was so awesome that Golden Boy, you saw everything, and in UFC you see nothing.
Yeah. The funniest thing was that pointing out when you guys would it be those moments in the depositions where it'd be like, oh, this is getting interesting, and then right when they're going to reveal something, oh, okay, that's blacked out. There's like good 10 of those where you're like, oh, this is really, oh, okay, of course we don't get that part.
Yeah, and like I think I had said, I was telling John, I had purchased the depo transcript of Kirk Hendrick, the UFC attorney today in the UFC antitrust case. All 8 pages of redaction.
Yeah,
there was one like they didn't redact something where he says okay, and that was it. It's like Pacers should really tell you, hey, don't buy this.
They should mark it as sealed so that okay, there's no point in getting this. There's no information. Well,
like 8 pages. What the
only part they didn't unredact is the only part they didn't redact is at the end when he goes, yes, I am. I swear by my name.
Right.
Which guy? I can't remember which one it was you had. Was it Epstein's or who's?
No, it's Hendrick.
Oh, Hendrick. Because yes, and then everything I said today was. The best of my knowledge, fully truthful or whatever. They always have that at the very end.
Yeah.
Act that too and get it over with. So just leave it all black. So I don't even bother.
Oh yeah, no. Hendrick was like, "Have you ever testified before? What did you testify, or what trials you were part of, or what like that?" And then all of a sudden, you can't see anything.
That's good stuff. Good stuff.
All right, so we really nailed that DAZN thing, huh?
Yeah, I guess it's a wait and see. I mean, it's interesting for Bellator. It's already if the Bellator shows are as good as the one coming up, I'll be impressed. But it's that kind of revenue. If it's fully just for those 7 shows, basically, that kind of revenue gives them money. The finally maybe they've been bidding for guys, and from all accounts they've been not on the break even point. But that kind of money lets them kind of bid for even higher level of UFC fighters. The Musasis, Rory McDonald types. Eddie Alvarez is now a free agent. That's a guy that might potentially be available. So who knows? You might see more guys like that in Bellator.
Yeah,
but
I think it would be the only for those 7. It has to be for everything, don't you?
Well, that takes the value down. People got excited for the 25 million because it's the 7 unique shows. But if that 25 million is also being used by Paramount to basically cover the 15, to cover a lot of the costs of the 15 that they're airing on Paramount, that they're splitting the costs that way, the lower what they're spending, the lower what Paramount's spending, then that 25 million is not as impressive as some people think. So
I mean, money's fungible. You can use it for whatever you want to use it for. The point
Yeah.
is getting $100 million.
Well, it's, I mean, Showtime, a lot of places have rules what you have to spend it on. I mean, Showtime, when they would do with the Strike Force, they would have, here's your, I think it was like 700,000, 800,000 a show. Actually, it's almost $1 million, I think, when they got bought, 900,000 a show by the time they got bought out. But they would have to prove, here's the money, and you're only getting the money if you have a good enough card. So obviously, most of that money would be spent on the card.
Right. Yeah, I see.
Yeah, so it's more of a boxing model, but we'll see. I guess the last thing, what was the other thing we were going to talk about today?
McG.
Oh, yeah, we had some news, some kind of minor fight news. I guess it wasn't that big a deal, but they announced a couple guys coming back. And I will just say right off the bat, first of all, if everybody missed it, they announced a bunch of big fights in the fall. It looks like they're going to have a pretty decent fourth quarter to make up for whatever they didn't do the rest of the year. But Conor McGregor's coming back, and he's fighting Khabib Nurmagomedov. And Nate Diaz is coming back, and he's going to flick off Dustin Poirier. That's the two big announcements. But I found interesting, and I found kind of hilarious, is the day of the announcement, the day before, the UFC rankings came out, and Conor McGregor went from number 3 to back to number 1 contender rankings in lightweight, and Nate Diaz, who had been pulled after 20 months of inactivity, just like Cain Velasquez, suddenly reappeared on the rankings at number 10. So I don't know. I just thought that was kind of strangely interesting. I'm sure the IBF ranking board is asking why everybody used to complain about them. But okay. So what's your guys' opinions of these fight announcements? Does this make the year worthwhile? Are these going to be huge blockbusters? Is McGregor, the Eagle Khabib, going to be the biggest fight in UFC history? Paul?
Oh, I was gonna Jason go. Well,
well,
what have the numbers been so far, Mr. MMA payout?
What are we doing? What are we talking about? The for which show?
This year. Just in general, this year. We know they've been down, but do you have the exact total off the top of your head?
Isn't
your MMA payout?
I know, but I'm not like, listen, I'm not
have these things memorized.
Go to this website. No, there hasn't been I don't think there has been a event over 300,000. To be honest with you,
the last one did over. Originally it supposedly estimate 380 by Meltzer, but then he downgraded it to like 330 or something.
Yeah. So anyway, I haven't gone. I haven't. I don't think we've updated them. Anyway. But anyway, I think it would definitely help. With a strong fourth quarter. Interesting enough, I don't know why they're doing it so soon for McGregor Nurmagomedov. Why not wait till they go to the MSG show in November? That's interesting. Just I don't know if they just want to see if they could turn him real quick for either the December show or the beginning of January to face the winner of Diaz-Poirier. Hopefully Diaz, they probably want that trilogy, but it's definitely going to be a big one. It proves the value of McGregor, that they got, that everyone is frenetic and is talking about this being the biggest fight in UFC history, which I'm not quite sure that's true. I know it's not true. But I do still think that it will do very well. It will rival. It will be the first pay-per-view which will go over 1 million in some time. To be honest with you, it also depends on what else they put on the card. But McGregor is a proven PPV commodity. Nurmagomedov, no one knows yet. Maybe perhaps they want to have it sooner than later because they want to make sure that he doesn't get hurt before, doesn't train too hard, overtrain, and makes October 6th. So there you go. I definitely think it's a great fight. If if they double it up with a great MSG card with perhaps George St. Pierre coming back, and then the December card with who knows, maybe Daniel Cormier, Stipe Miocic, if they can't get Brock Lesnar yet. that'll be a good end of the year for Zuffa.
Yeah, and Amanda Nunes does not drive pay-per-views at all.
No.
That's because I think, is she the headliner right now?
Yeah, Cyborg Nunes in December. So they're going to have someone else on top of that. She would be a strong co-main, but yeah, she's not a Rousey level type.
Although Cyborg has kind of proven a slight next tier down pay-per-view drive.
Yeah, definitely. It would be
and the whole idea of the two belts, the champion might propel it, is a more interesting beast. But Nunes is one of those examples that you beat the champ and you didn't become a star. Although she's obviously at a higher level than she was before she beat Ronda. But Holly Holm's the opposite. Holly Holm obviously elevated, even though she was a known commodity in the MMA sphere. She became a major star after beating Ronda Rousey. So, but I found it interesting too. One thing I want to talk about is the Twitter, the internet negotiations of, I guess the interview and negotiations of Abdelaziz for Khabib, where I found it just fascinating when he was talking about his negotiating. He goes, he wants Khabib said, there's no way I'm taking less than Nate Diaz made against Conor McGregor. And then Al-Aziz said, yeah, I mean, if they make 100 million, he's going to want 10 million. Let him, I'm like, what? You're the I mean, first of all, you're not a star, but you're the champion. You hold this commodity that makes the fight the key B-side. Could you imagine someone in boxing saying, yeah, you keep 90%. We just want 10. We're very happy with that.
I know.
Even Timothy Bradley would never go along with that. He did pretty well in boxing, but he didn't hold the belts when he's fighting Pacquiao, and he was still getting, Pacquiao got 25 million, and he was still getting a $5 million guarantee, 20%, and without a title to his name.
But he can't fight too hard because he doesn't want to get stripped, right? And then be like, crap, now I have no belt and no McGregor fight.
I guess that, shows you the power of the UFC and their titles is, in a weird way, if you don't go along, they go, we can strip you and say you're not the champ. I mean, they kind of did that. They were talking about doing that with I guess they didn't do it with Cody Covington, but the idea that the interim title can be taken away from you, and some contracts have pay-per-view points for the interim title. It's like that's pretty strong leverage over you. Yeah, you hold the title, but you hold it only as long as we want you to hold it, and then we'll take it from you. And you're out of this big fight with McGregor.
It is. I think it would be a little bit easier for you. I mean, again, this is all weird, but to try to argue that we could strip someone like Khabib, since McGregor had it, right, and then they stripped him, and then there's two non-titleist fights. I'm just saying they would make the argument for something.
How do you? I don't know how you make that argument after
McGregor back in.
After a 2-year layoff.
No, I understand, but I'm just saying that I think they'd sell it something like that. Yeah. But who knows?
Yeah, that's the benefit of having no written guidelines for any of this, because you can kind of make it up in the back room whenever you want. No one can call you on it, because what are the rules? Well, we make it up as we go.
I don't know, and I'm tempted. I want to hear what you guys. I think, Jason, you said it's going to do over 1 million, but not the highest, but not more than what McGregor Diaz 2, I believe, was the biggest.
No, what is it?
Yeah,
was it Brock? No, 1.5.
McGregor Diaz 2, it should be, right?
What did McGregor Diaz 2? Lesnar Mir did 1.6.
Well, not according to the UFC.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
That estimate's off. We know from a lot of sources that it did less than
McGregor Diaz did 1.3.
Two.
Yeah, these are the Meltzer estimates, we should say.
I'm sorry, McGregor Diaz 1.6.
Yeah.
McGregor Diaz 1.6.
Yeah. So I'm really tempted to, right? The popularity kind of you need two to tango here, right? And so I'm torn with it. While the Khabib fans love to like yell at you online about how popular he is, especially outside of the U.S., but when we're looking at North American numbers, right, I'm not quite sure that Khabib's popularity is there, but McGregor is in the stratosphere with what happened with Mayweather, and then his arrest, right, getting him, even though it might have been technically negative, that people are likely going to want to see him, and then seeing that he's the underdog, and throwing that in there, and then hearing a lot of experts picking Khabib, I'm very tempted to have this one over 1.6. That's purely a guess, but I'm tempted to put it over that. And I'm guessing you're not doing that, right, Jason?
Yeah. I'm skeptical about the numbers. I mean, I definitely think it's going over 1 million, but let's see. Let's see what else they put on the card. Maybe that'll add something. But yeah, I 1.6 is really hard. I mean, really hard to attain. And it also, but the thing is, it depends. They're still going to have some sort of promotion, but so you never know. Maybe we'll get a all-out brawl on stage or something, and then that'll draw up. I mean, if you get something crazy like that, I mean, what's kind of odd is that they did show him throw that dolly into the bus as part of the promo, which is kind of bad. Is a bad look, just because that was a crime. Even though he got off scot-free. But yeah, so maybe we'll see how the promotion. I mean, the promotion is probably going to be fantastic. And I just don't understand why they didn't slow play this a little bit till November so they could get some do a world tour, for God's sakes, like they did with Aldo, which I thought was was fun to watch as they went along. But who knows?
I think wonder if McGregor just didn't want to fight in New York because of his legal problems and the taxes.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Well, now we have two choices for Vegas. We have 2 Vegas shows in October or wait till December, and we might as well strike now. October it is. I think, based on, first of all, I don't think any UFC event has ever done 1.6 million. I don't think that's. I think they've done. I think when you look at the numbers, when you're given the numbers that they did, they're always much lower than the estimates, almost always. And the other thing is people underestimate is how much UFC makes from bars. They make a lot more than I think people suspect from bars. I think that actually might hurt UFC pay-per-view sales to compared to boxing, is that so many fans are conditioned to go to the bar to watch it, and
usually it's free.
Yeah, it's or a small fee, where boxing will have much higher, because they do it much rarer. Boxing will have much higher charge when you go into a bar. It's like $20 common for Mayweather, I remember, and it was free for UFC events. Mm-hmm. So I think it'll be the highest selling pay-per-view ever in the UFC history, but highest selling will be lower than what people imagine the highest selling is. So, I should actually wait, because it could take off. I could see this becoming almost viral, a meme, kind of like what happened at the Mayweather fight, where it takes off on its own. It will never do anything close to that, but who knows? It might just blow away anything the UFC's ever done. So I'm going to wait and see how the tickets start selling, see what that looks like, and see what the web traffic is as we get closer to the event. But right now, I'm going to guess 1.5 million. That'll be my over/under for people who want to bet out there against me. But I'll say just under just over 1.5 million, biggest selling pay-per-view in UFC history. But it might do it might blow. It's possible it could blow it away, and it's also possible that for whatever reason this doesn't catch on to the mass audience, and it does barely over 1 million. But I think Khabib's actually a good beat. I think actually Khabib made a mistake. Usually you don't tell a fighter to risk his belt when he has a big money fight, but I think Khabib could have come into this with a lot more, as a much stronger B-side, if he had maybe 1 or 2 other fights where he just beat the heck out of a contender, mm-hmm. and just got to the point where people are like, oh, this is where a sizable number of fans are like, this is the real lightweight champion. And no one's giving him credit because Conor hasn't fought him yet. And get to that point, where it's, I don't want to make I'm going to make a comparison that's completely silly, but I want to compare it to Frazier versus Ali. This is no Frazier versus Ali of any kind of, historical or cultural impact. But Frazier, the thing that made Frazier and Ali so huge is one guy was the best in the world at the time, and everybody's like, wait, he hasn't fought this other guy who's, there was a legitimate argument who was the best in the world. Khabib could be better, but he hasn't put on that. He hasn't convinced enough people that he's the real best fighter in the world, because not enough people have seen him. And I think that's the one mistake. They should have, maybe, it's a risk, but maybe his management said, hey, we should get one more fight snuck in earlier. Oh my God, we got a guest star the show. But one more fight thing. If Khabib had beaten the crap out of, just name a fighter, Eddie Alvarez, or if he could have beat, there's always risk with Ferguson. But if he could have just really demolished one of those guys on a pay-per-view, enough of those watching them, I think that would have elevated Khabib to a much higher level. And
I'll add to that. I'm not sure how McGregor is going to do what McGregor does on the promotion side, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how good Khabib is going to be on the promotion side, with talking trash and all that, getting people fired up. But then again, we've also got ESPN much more into MMA now, and they're going to be essentially promoting the hell out of it a lot more than in the past. So we've got all these different factors going on. But I think it's going to come down to what the overall consensus view is on McGregor, and then at least Khabib as a reasonable dance partner. He obviously in the fight world he's more than reasonable. I'm probably going to pick him, but in the minds of all those casual fans is what I'm getting at.
And I think some people inflate. I think McGregor, this will sell good. But remember, Mayweather only did those huge numbers when he was against a McGregor, against a Pacquiao, against a Canelo, and against a De La Hoya. Otherwise, him and Pacquiao's big numbers were, around the million mark. So right. McGregor could be this massive pay-per-view star, but without the other guy to make it without the chemistry to make it a super event, he could be he could be only in the million pay-per-view selling range, only. But that's still huge. If he could do the numbers he did against Diaz and against Alvarez, just 1.2, 1.3 range against those guys, that's huge numbers. So that's what Mayweather and Pacquiao were doing at their best when they weren't fighting another superstar like Oscar De La Hoya. So he's in that ballpark if he did that again. In fact, he's better because they had never had a string that long.
Yeah. You changing your mind there, Jason?
No, I'm not changing my mind. I do agree with all the points. I do agree with all the points. I think, though, that they will play up a lot of the backstory. So, I mean, the backstory of McGregor flying from Ireland to New York just to go after Khabib for messing with his buddy the day before, that sort of thing. I mean, I'm sure they'll the footage of the was it the World WSOF show where the Khabib and his crew fought with Diaz, and how he's they're willing to fight anywhere, that kind of thing. So I mean, it'll be entertaining for everybody to see. I'm just skeptical about going high with pay-per-view buys nowadays.
Yeah.
What's kind of interesting we haven't heard yet is I haven't heard that McGregor's negotiated a new contract yet.
How many fights does he have left?
He has 4. But I meant a new because after the Mayweather fight, and now I start thinking maybe Paul will probably be right, and that his money in the Mayweather fight was attached to coming back to MMA.
I actually know the answer to that, but I can't say it.
Yeah, well, we'll talk after the show.
Yeah.
Is that he'll come back, and you'd think because of all the Mayweather fight that he wants so much money, he would be negotiating a new contract before he returned, right? And I haven't heard anything about that yet, so that was just that. But he's still, and everybody else, it'll be a big money maker. The Khabib will make what Diaz made. What I don't know, estimate $4 or $5 million against McGregor in that second fight. So Khabib should hopefully make in that ballpark. Should, maybe 6. I know he's getting 10. UFC's not giving that out. There's no way. If
casual MMA fans had an appreciation for Khabib like hardcore MMA fans do, this would be huge.
But I think, well, that's why I think they made the mistake, though, by not having him fight, trying to get him in an extra fight or two. It's just because you have to introduce, the fans didn't, he was out so long. You needed to get fans to go, oh my God, look at this guy just beat the crap out of everybody else and he owns the title. And I think that would have elevated him. And I think Khabib can actually be a star. I don't think a superstar. That's a different category than McGregor's. But he could be a guy that a lot of people, the problem in MMA is people expect, if you don't sell a million pay-per-views, a big pay-per-view seller, you're not a star to a lot of people. But to me, you're a star if you can help sell tickets, you can draw ratings, decent ratings, and you can add a sizable amount of pay-per-views. It doesn't have to be hundreds of, it doesn't have to be 500,000 pay-per-views you don't add, but you can add a couple, you know, if you could add 200,000 pay-per-views to it, you've easily covered your costs as a fighter to what the UFC is paying you probably.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
So that's my opinion on that. I think he'll be a star. I think he's already kind of a star. He's an MMA star in the hardcore. Can he get outside that bubble?
Yeah, and the thing people have to remember is it's not just US only that matters, right? The UFC is considering the world and what's happening in their international markets as well. Even if it's not driving pay-per-view revenue, if it's generating buzz and helping your fan base grow and stuff like that. So what's happening to Khabib in the United States isn't the only thing that matters here.
Of course, it is prize fighting, so it's whatever's dollars is basically the measuring stick. So that's the unfortunate thing.
Dollars do matter.
That's why Demetrius Johnson is not a major star, because he doesn't generate that. Well, I think Demetrius is kind of screwed because I do think the model the UFC uses, if the UFC was on HBO all these years, I think we'd look at Johnson as a bigger star because hardcore fans would be willing to dish out money to have subscriptions to HBO just to watch him. You just need a smaller pool of guys that will watch all the fights that have come for guys like him that make him a bigger star. It's when he has to sell to the casuals, it's like, okay, now he's not as valuable. When that's your business model is selling to casuals, he's no longer as valuable.
Right.
So he'd be good for a DAZN if you had put him on the ESPN the ESPN app thing. If you have I don't think they'll do that because they want to keep the titles on the pay-per-views, keep those going. But guys like him, those champs, smaller guys on the app would be a good selling point that you see the title matches when you get the app. Again, UFC, look, free advice. I'm making you guys millions. And what do I get?
You're free consultant. Hey, At least we know that someone, it might not be people of the UFC or UFC attorneys, they have to listen to this whole entire thing to make sure we don't give anything away or any of those like documents that we've seen that we're not supposed to talk about or something like that.
Listen, but for you, for some attorney out there, this is easy billable.
Yeah, I know. It's so enjoyable.
This is easy
I know.
Well, they're watching TV. They got this on the background. I'm billing. Or you could do the old double bill where you're also working on something else.
It's very smart. All I know is
and also illegal. So don't do that, kids. That's illegal.
All I know is I'm giving the free advice to the UFC, and they didn't even credential me when I asked this week. That was just terrible.
Did they reply to you?
No.
They just ignored you?
Yeah, I guess I sent to 3 different people over there. And
name the names. Who are these people?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. No.
The UFC is pretty notorious for just ignoring people. Well, let's say people from Bloody Elbow.
They didn't used to ignore me. People would get back. Joe Silva got back to me before, and so did what's guy? I can't remember the guy that used to take the. Who's the guy who got thrown to the ground by Cormier and Jones?
Yeah.
Damn it! How could I? He's working for Philadelphia.
He's Don Anik doppelganger.
What's that?
I remember that guy. I forgot.
Man, how is that possible? I forgot his name. Embarrassing.
Wow. Yeah. Shoot. We can all. It's like you can picture him. You just can't think. Yeah. And when I've contacted them for Forbes too, they've. I think they got back to me once and ignored me.
Dave Schaller.
There we go.
Dave. Sorry, Dave. I'm sorry. I apologize for not remembering your name. It's actually kind of embarrassing that I didn't remember his name. But he got back to me a couple of times. Not every time, but a couple of times. But I think the new guys have no interest in getting back. I'm just telling you guys, listen, free advice, and you could, it goes both ways.
It goes both ways. What advice are they going to give you?
I don't know. I know they're going to give me I don't really care about credentials. I prefer not to watch the fights live, so I prefer watching them on TV. So. Because unlike Paul, I have bad eyesight. I have surgery in one eye, so I'm almost technically blind in one. So I much prefer not being with such a limited view where I from a distance where I can't see. I prefer to have my nose pressed against the TV so I can actually see what's going on.
If you're not going to be like 15th row or closer, right, in between 1 and 15, I'd almost rather watch on TV as well. Except when I get free tickets to the luxury box, I don't ever say no. but which
Yeah.
is where I was last Saturday. But we're recording this on Sunday, by the way.
Way to humble brag on that one.
I know.
What a jackass.
I'm in the pocket
Rubbing
of,
it in.
I'm in the pocket of somebody.
The point I was trying to make is the view there is not that good, and I normally don't like.
As
going
someone is
information.
rubbing your feet and giving you the free buffet.
I was stuck watching with Josh Gross, so what do I have to? No, I'm just kidding.
It's like if you're in row 1 through 15, it's fun to be there in person. Right? That's what's great about the smaller UFC shows, though. Like,
No, I've been to I was at the Bellator show with you, and I've been to a couple I've been to other, UFC and a Strikeforce show and Affliction, but I went to the Bellator show and you were there. I went to 2, I think, as credentials. I'm just there because there's questions you can ask people there on the background, but I really don't like being there live. And, partly because every seat I have in the press row, I'm always wedged against a pole and the person next to me. I think it was Eddie Mercado last time, just leaning on me, bastard. So wedged in there. But and you on the other side, you have all this room, and I got a freaking pole jamming into me. But no, I don't really like live show. It's partly people might not know this. I have a very bad eyesight from shit like that. That's unimportant to you losers out there. But it makes live shows not very enjoyable.
Well, before we head out, I will say that the best view in the house, guy. Well, I guess is the judge's seat. That one is fun, except when people get all sweaty and bloody, and like someone gets hit, and you see it splash up, and you're like, "God damn it, blood's about to hit my face," and I have to keep looking because I'm a judge. Like that is not fun. But
that doesn't sound appealing at all.
No, but the rest of it's pretty fun. Pretty good.
That sounds like a blast.
Hey.
How many payoffs have you already accepted?
What?
How many payoffs have you accepted?
0. Hey, I turned down the Alliance MMA check too. I still have it right here.
Wait,
I thought we were working on that you're going to fix a couple fights and telling us in advance so we can put some bets down. I thought that was that's why it's called show money. Telling people how to make money here. We're not here not to make money.
Man, and okay. One other thing, really quick, man. The number of amateur shows here in LA, it's like I believe it has plummeted relative to last year. Like Alliance was doing show after show after show, and now there's so many fewer. Like I haven't seen. God, I don't know if I've seen. I need to look back at the schedule, but a Roy Engelbrecht show this summer. He was doing a ton of them last year.
His mixed boxing and MMA events. He'd always do like 3 and 3 or 2 and 2 or
the
something.
Gladiator or
he was doing the Gladiator ones outside of the Coliseum. Those are so much fun.
Didn't he have a lawsuit going on with Vegas or something?
He forged a form.
Oh yes.
Wait, do you want to say allegedly?
Allegedly.
Well,
no, he.
I thought he was found guilty, or he confessed.
He did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
but he did it for the best intentions, so that's.
Yeah,
I don't know.
He did it for one of his boxers.
I think actually, Roy's
a great guy, by the way.
Yeah, based on what I've seen about the number of I think the regional MMA scene just has been going down for like 7 years straight now. I mean, I think so since 2010-11. Every year, I think it's been lower.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
See, up here's not too bad. They have a couple shows a month up here.
But it reminds me of the same thing happened with boxing, and then when it got on TV, the more boxing, it killed the regional club scene in boxing, and I think you get an event every Saturday. Bellator, UFC, especially UFC, and I guess the fad of UFC being MMA being cool, it's waned a bit. And the other thing too is the whole industry of like regional MMA is basically predatory upon the fighters. Money is made off the fighters. It's not made on fans. You sign a guy and then you say, hey, you have to sell a number of tickets to get paid and be on the card, and so they have to rope in friends and cohort. It's this whole system that's built on using the fighters to build revenue, not by selling to fans, by how many people he knows that wants to come and support him so he can continue fighting.
It's a pyramid scheme.
Oh, it's not that does not sound like a healthy industry, if you ask me. That's very similar to like acting business out here in Hollywood, where there's all these industry parts, headshots and acting classes that really don't help actors. Their whole point is that you want to get in the acting business, we offer some sort of access to it, and we're going to just charge you the shitload of it. So you, in case, because you want to continue your dream of hopefully making it.
All right.
It's so positive when we.
That's a feel good message of the
Is that
day.
what soured you on the industry?
The death of the regional MMA scene. It's such a positive episode.
And the other thing that's strange, I don't know why. I don't know exactly why this would be, or I should talk to someone about this. But the shows, like the regional MMA shows out here, the amateur ones, all seem to be like during UFC fight pay-per-view. Like they're doing MSG, they're doing something. I don't think
I've noticed that too.
McGregor Day, and you're like what the hell? Because I look because I want to work some of them. Then I have to say, do I want to miss the pay-per-view or not? It's annoying. And I need to talk to someone about why that is.
I think the reasoning, and this is me being sarcastic, but it sounds funny, but the reasoning is because they know if they had a chance to spend money in the pay-per-view, they wouldn't have enough money to buy the ticket to the show.
Like the following week?
Yeah, well, yeah, or it's on a different day. I'm going to get the pay-per-view. Only by having it on the day of the pay-per-view, the people have to make a decision. Okay, I can afford the ticket to the show. I didn't spend the money on the pay-per-view. Again, I was just being sarcastic. That's me being sarcastic.
I don't know. But hey, they make their money off of friends and family, and I would imagine the friends and family are like, "Come on, man, I want to watch the pay-per-view."
I know. That's
Anyway, all right. I think we added an extra topic in there once Alliance came up, so
yeah.
We hit 4. All right.
I think we beat a dead horse in this whole show.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to throw in there, guys?
Yeah.
I guess we got to wait for the plaintiffs to file their counter argument for the motion. Then we'll have another show, which we obviously won't have read fully the details, and we'll screw everything up. But still, we'll have a show for that.
That lawyer who's billing this is like, yeah, you guys really screwed this one up.
Yeah, I know. God, they've looked me up on the bar website. I'm gonna file a complaint against this asshole.
I will throw in just that September. I think it's September. It should be September. Filing for it's right around. They put it right around Triple G Canelo. I think it might be that Friday, and I saw that and I was like, thanks a lot, guys, because I usually like staying up the night that these things come out. That is critically important. I mean, that's where the fighters make their side of the case, and if they don't do a good sell job there, this thing could be gone. And we don't want it to be gone. We want it to go to trial.
Listen, UFC, we're sorry if you lose billions, but we really need the clicks on our articles because we find this fascinating.
No, what would be what would be great is if they have an appeal. That would be even better. But anyway, I digress.
Oh, no.
I will be in. By the way, I'll be I'll be in LA late September. So maybe we could do a live version of this.
We can do it in my little studio here.
There we go. Yeah, that would be cool. It's like our own version of whatever MMA. Why am I blanking right now?
MMA Live.
Yeah. All right. Anything else?
No, we should just get out of here. This is terrible.
On behalf of John Nash and Jason Cruz, I'm Paul Gift, reminding you to keep doing business as usual.